Thank you. First of all, we do have cell phone issues. Okay, I really want to say that. And just my social worker up there, I can't see him right now, but his name is Dr. Jim Howland, and he is all over that cell phone issue. So thank you. I am in awe, and my head's about ready to explode. So I'm so fortunate, and I feel like it's such an honor to be here. So thank you so much for having me. And I don't know how I made the cut, but thank you. And I've worked with Scott it was about 25 years ago, and I have some really good stories for later on. So yeah, it was funny, about 7 years ago, I was hired to start something called a recovery school. And if you go online and you look up the word recovery school, it talks about credit recovery, which maybe has a little bit to do with what I do, but really not so much. Because I work with adolescents, people very rarely think adolescent recovery. So being the educator, I thought, oh sure, this is a great idea. I am going to take the world of education, where people clearly have in education, people want to tell you how to teach children, and they know the best way to do it. Okay, and there's a lot of philosophies, and I went to school for it too, so I have my own philosophies. But there's a whole world of education. And then what I try to do now, so then they said, oh yeah, and then you're going to implement this other thing, and it's called addiction. And we're not call it, it's prevention, it's treatment, it's intervention, it's recovery, and there's this entire complex world where people have really clear opinions about what recovery is, and about how to get kids there successfully. So I asked my friend Janet to do these slides because she's an artist. Then I said, hey Janet, why don't we do this? We'll do a Venn diagram, and we'll have like the world of education and all these words here, and then we'll have like addiction, and we'll have all those words there. And then she looked at me, she goes, what the hell is a Venn diagram? But she came up with a better slide than I could possibly have imagined. So this is why we don't take arts out of the education, because Janet obviously made a better slide than I could have possibly ever. And what it looks like is this really messy world that I call my IEP versus IOP world, because there's acronyms, and it's complex, and it's so messy. And it's messy enough that back in June of this past year, even some of my parents and students don't know this, but I was having a hard time really deciding whether or not I was going to stay with my school and stay in education. And the universe, is my higher power, and it tells me a lot of things, but I have a really hard time listening to it. So sometimes there's a 2x4 that has to fall out of the universe and hit me upside the head and tell me what the hell I need to do next. Thank you, Janet, for that slide. It's perfect. So I decided I was going to take a week, okay, because that's long enough to decide your future, right? So I'm going to take a week, and I'm going to just really try to explore some options that don't even include education. Like, I'm thinking sales, whatever. I don't care. It's hard work, but meaningful and amazing, but hard, for a multitude of reasons, not the school. And 3 days into my vacation, I get a phone call from a young woman. She's 18 years old. She's addicted to heroin, and she says, my mom's really sick and I need a ride to detox. And you know what? I said, okay, sure, when am I picking you up? She said 10 o'clock the next morning. So I show up at 10 o'clock the next morning with all the things she needs for detox. It's like getting on an airplane, right? So you have this whole list of things you can bring and can't bring. And I've already called the detox. Well, actually, I think Jim called the detox. And I've arranged for her to have a bed, which is the hard part. Yeah, I'm just joking, it's not the hard part. Because then you have to follow insurance. Okay, so so I picked this young woman up, and what we call is she's pretty banged up. And man, she's beautiful. This kid's amazingly beautiful. And she's so sad, she's not even there. So I get her in my car, and by the grace of God, we made it to the hospital without her throwing up. For those of you who know about 18-year-olds and insurance, if you have to go to a detox, you have to go through the emergency room. Insurance capitates that. So we go walk into the emergency room, and this little girl, this 18-year-old little girl, she knows exactly what to do. So I'm just kind of watching this, and I'm in a third-person, really weird world, and she hands her whatever, insurance card, and the woman goes, what are you here for? She goes, I need a detox. And I'm just watching this, and I'm thinking, this is so weird. And then she said, for what? And the little girl says, heroin. And the woman goes, ugh. She scoffed. Okay, we've been in the emergency room for 3 minutes, not even. And she scoffed. And she gave her something to go get a urine screen. And the little girl goes, I can't right now. So she goes and she gets her vitals done. And then we go and we sit in this waiting room. And there's about, I don't know, 20 or 25 chairs in the waiting room. And there's 11 of us in this waiting room. And of those 11 of us, 5 I've recognized that are probably there from the same thing. Mind you, it's Tuesday at noon. And there's 6 of us sitting there for some type of a detox. And maybe I'm wrong, I didn't go like take a poll because I thought that would be considerate and compassionate. Are you here too? So, right, so we're about an hour and a half into this. Okay, we're about an hour and a half into this, and this little girl is out of her tree. And she said, I need a cigarette. And I'm like, it's a hospital. I need a cigarette, it's a hospital. And she's like, I can't do it. So I go to the kiosk woman who was so friendly earlier, and I say, can I take her out for a cigarette? And she looked at me and she goes, if you walk outside that door, you will have to start this whole process over again. Mind you, I am a couple hours into this process, and to the life of a detoxing 18-year-old addict, it feels like 9 months. So I know if I get her outside that door, she's not going back, because that's like putting her through torture again. So I sit down and I'm like, oh, she said no. And I put my arm around her, and she puts her head on my shoulder, and she's crying. I'm like, okay, we're gonna get through this. And I'm doing my best to comfort her. If I could be her heroine for that next 30 minutes, I would. They finally call her name, and we go into these nice emergency room, like when I bring my kids, we go to those rooms, and they're like white, billowy curtains, and I can hear, it's like noon, so I can hear some news, and I can hear like some talk shows on, and I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. And of course, I have my sweet little bedraggled 18-year-old with me, but it's okay. And it brings me back, and then I take a turn, and then we go to the psych ward. And the psych ward looks something like this. And mind you, this is just how I remember it, which isn't pretty. So we take her right into the psych ward, and they just kind of shove us in there. I don't even remember there was an exchange ward, but they put us in there, and they shut the door with something like a Scared Straight video. And there's a metal table. In the middle of this room, there's a metal table, like something out of a morgue. I seriously thought that. And then there's a chair that's bolted to the ground. It's gray. And there's something that resembles a television, but it's behind like 1.5 feet of like plexiglass, like we were gonna watch TV anyway. So, and I don't think there was a remote. But this little girl knows to assume this position. She gets on the middle of this table, and she curls up in the fetal position, and she starts wailing. Okay, I'm doing my best, man. Like, so I'm like everything I can do. Finally, after a half hour, of course, I'm crying too. So I knock on the door, and the nurse, I'm assuming she's a nurse, answers the door. And I said, can I get like a pillow and a blanket for this young girl? I have 3 small children, and I've been in the emergency room, please. And they have these nice warm blankets. Can I get her one of those warm blankets? I think that would be so comforting for her. And please, I have to do something because we're not going to make it. And she looked at me and she said, you know, the doctor will be right with you. She's really busy. And I said, well, you know, I didn't go to med school and I don't have a license to practice medicine, but I happen to know I probably don't need a prescription for a pillow, and I could have said flipping blanket. And at which point in time, I probably said it a little too loudly because I was at a special ed meeting a couple weeks prior, and there was a woman walking by who was at that meeting, and she recognized my voice. And she goes, Michelle? And this woman was dressed really nicely, like I am today. And I was wearing like jeans and a t-shirt, and probably my hair was in a ponytail or something that resembled that with a cowboy hat, no. With like a ball cap. That's a typical Michelle thing. And so she turned and she goes, Michelle, what do you, and I said, oh, I'm here with a student. At which point in time I saw the nurse go, oh. And then the woman goes, that's Michelle Lipinski. She runs the recovery school. And at which point in time, I saw the nurse walk over to me, put her hand on my shoulder and say, I am so sorry, I thought you were her mother. And that was that 2x4 hit me in the head and going, would you stop feeling so sorry for yourself? Because you're not in the game for yourself. You're in it for these little girls and these little boys and these kids who are in these situations they can't get out of, and they're sick. So you know what, I started this journey way long ago with Mr. Strange, but I was a science teacher. Not unlike a lot of people. There's like a thread in this room where people were science teachers. And, right? And so I was a science teacher, and I was a biology and a chemistry teacher. And I clearly remember in 1988, 89, I had 130 students in my classes, which is a lot if you're a science teacher. And we had just passed this policy called an attendance policy. Ever hear of one of those? Those are a good idea. And there was something like 3 absences and you get an administrative failure. And we were like, hell yeah, we're going to get them to school. They're going to come. We're going to, yeah, we'll show them, right? And so they're not showing up. And so this is what my classroom looked like for the first half of the year. And then I realized mid-year, holy hell, I'm failing 42 students. So I kind of was like, wow, I'm failing 42 students. That might be a problem. Maybe I should go and talk to administration. So I did, and I was kind of floating the idea of alternative education, something I want to do. I really like these kids, but they're not coming to school, and we kind of need to do something different. Well, lo and behold, by the end of the year, that's what my classroom looked like. I had lost the back row of every single one of my classes, and I didn't know what the hell was going on. So I go to my principal, and I say, I really think we need to do something, and I'm interested in alternative education. Can I please make the jump from this into alternative education? And he said, you know, Michelle, you are such a good teacher. And I get that, because I have phenomenal teachers. He said, I don't really want to lose you to those kids. Yeah, there's the 2x4. So, of course, I did as any good teacher would do. I went over his head. And ended up starting my alt school in a small engine room with 200 small engines and 5 convicted felons. But it all worked out for me. This is what a typical assessment looked like. You guys ever see these? Yeah. And so I would get a lot of these, and I'd be like, oh, that's great artwork. And I never acknowledged the fact that these kids were trying to talk to me. They were trying to say, Miss, I'm smoking too much weed. And I was like, oh, nice artwork. I never acknowledged the fact that drugs or alcohol may have played even the least significant part in these children not coming to school, not being able to access education. I never acknowledged it, and they were showing me in every assessment that I gave them. So I loved alternative education. It was great. And I realized that the academic integrity wasn't nearly as important as developing that community. And I can tell you right now, I had the best time with these students. It was one of those times where if you work in this field of alternative education, like I could be in the worst, darkest alley, and I'd be like, yo, Jose, come on, let's go. And like I had people that at any given time throughout that time, I felt like a part of something. I knew every probation officer, I knew the judge, I knew DCF, I knew DYS, I knew everyone that I thought was going to get these kids better. Part of my job in 2004, when opiates hit Salem, was checking kids for track marks. You know what? I was in grad school. I could tell you right now, nobody said, oh, and by the way, when little Johnny comes in, you better check him for track marks. So I was pretty frustrated because drugs and alcohol were taking over my school, and I really didn't have any resources. Well, actually, I did have resources, but I didn't know how to get there. So lo and behold, by the grace of God, 2005 comes, and my superintendent at the time, Dr. Herbert Levine, he's my mentor. He's brilliant. He had been in education for 35 years. He has 4 kids. And he calls an assembly. And it wasn't like a school-wide assembly. It was like a district-wide assembly. We're going to have an assembly, and it's at the high school, and it's at 3 o'clock. It's after school, and I walk in, and there was like cameras. And I look up there, and I see Dr. Levine, and I see his son. Okay, Dr. Levine has been an educator for 40 years. He was running schools in the middle of the South End, and gangs were going on in the middle of, he's amazing. And he knows everything about development and education and how to work with kids. And I'm hearing him speak about his son, who's probably 19, don't quote me on that, and his opiate addiction. I'm like, wait, your son is a varsity athlete. He was in the Little League World Series. Like they made it, Peabody made it to the Little League World Series. He's a varsity athlete, and you're my superintendent. Wow. My life is going to change. And it did. So the following year, I was like, okay, now I'm really going to look at this. Searching backpacks, and inevitably I would find like stuff I didn't mean to find, which I was like, oh, don't worry about that, just hide that. I actually boarded a plane with a crack pipe. That's a whole different story because I had confiscated one and forgot to take it out of my pocketbook. Don't do that. They don't like that. Switchblades, same thing. Don't do it. So part of my job was really trying to keep ahead of the kids, which is, I mean, as you guys all know, with the whole music, and they're smarter than us because they got a cell phone. And so part of my job was really trying to keep these kids safe in a very insane way because I thought I was keeping them safe. So lo and behold, I get a phone call. I'm on maternity leave with my third kid, and mind you, my maternity leave's got shorter and shorter. Oh no, 5 weeks is good, we'll come back. I'm just joking, I love my kids. But so I was back at work, but I wasn't yet. And so Dr. Levine called me and he said, you know, I have this really great opportunity. Let's start something called a recovery school. I'm like, okay, that sounds like a great idea, I'm all set. And I said, you know, Herb, I know where all my resources are here. Okay, I feel really comfortable in this district. I've been here for 12 years plus. I love it. I know everyone. And more importantly, I know the landmines, right? So I know the resources. I know the landmines. I'm really comfortable. Did you see the baby in the bucket? Okay, I'm kind of busy right now. And so as if he had planted something on me, I come back to school, and in the first or second week I was there, this little girl, her name is Jill. She let me use her name. She comes back from treatment. I don't know if y'all have seen anyone when they go to treatment, when they look like, high school kids wear addiction. I can walk into any of your schools and I could pick out the 50 most addicted kids in your school. It's a gift. And yeah, you should hire me. I'm like a drug sniffing dog. So I can though, it's cursed. And so I go in, so this little girl, she looked hard, and it was hard to watch this. And she comes back from treatment. Holy Lord, this child is beautiful. Her hair looks great. Her skin is clear. Her eyes are lucid. She's like beaming. And she is my science project. Because, you know, being a science teacher, we like to have these little experiments. So I said, Jill, you're going to sit next to me for 3 days. You're going to sit next to me until I can show everybody we don't need to start a recovery school because you know what? I'm going to keep you sober. So, at the end of the third day, mind you, Jill was with me. Everything I did, Jill did. Well, she didn't come to the board with me, which I think had happened every time I was at the board. But at the end of the third day, she starts crying. I go, Jill, really? Emotional? Mm-hmm. And she looked at me and she goes, you don't see it. I go, what do you mean? She goes, Mrs. Lipinski, you don't see it. I go, what am I not seeing, Jill? She had given me a list. And she said, you know, these two kids, they went out, they said they were going to the bathroom. They came back, they reeked of weed. She said, and you know, little so-and-so over there, I won't tell you his name, but I clearly remember his face, he was doing lines off his desk. And you know what? We went down to the gym. Remember we went down to the gym? Did you see the gym teacher? He was wearing Corona flip-flops. Oh, and by the way, the woman, I was like 5 minutes late, so when she checked me in, the woman, the administrator, she had a keychain with a Budweiser thing on it. Oh, and by the way, 10 minutes ago, an administrator in the school poked her head in the classroom and said, hey, Michelle, we're going out for drinks. You want some? I didn't see it. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. Because you know what? It's embedded in the culture and the fabric of what our high schools are, and we don't see it unless we have to see it. And that was really hard to hear. And if that wasn't enough, I went out with one of the other administrators. Excuse me. And there was a school committee meeting or something, so a lot of the administrators were meeting, and I walked into this restaurant. This is the next day. And I said, I didn't say anything. I was just standing there. We hadn't even sat down yet. And another woman comes up to me, and she was an administrator in a different building, and she goes, oh, you heard what happened to so-and-so, right? I go, no. And when someone says, you heard what happened to so-and-so, you get a picture in your head of who so-and-so looks like. So-and-so is beautiful, and she's amazing, and she had graduated. She had a life, and I was a part of that. And this woman, this other administrator said, you know what happened to so-and-so? And I said, no, and I'm thinking she's going to say, blah, 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 she got into college. She goes, oh, she died of a heroin overdose, there's a shocker. As if she killed a plant. As if it wasn't worth anything at all. So I could tell you right now, I didn't sit down and have dinner, and I didn't go to the school committee meeting. I went home and I did my resume. Because you know what? I didn't see it. So what I didn't know was this. Addiction is a disease, guys. And back in 1953, the American Medical Association told us this. And it doesn't look like too many people got that memo. Because we still treat kids who are addicted, people who are addicted, like it's a choice. Like it's their choice to want to drop out of school, lose their friends, get kicked out of their house, sell their Xboxes, and God knows doing whatever they need to do to get that one thing that makes them feel okay. These kids are sick, and we're treating them like they're bad? I don't know, but I learned when we treat these kids with kindness and compassion, and I have an amazing staff, and thank God for them, because I couldn't do it all, they heal. And that big hole that they had to fill with whatever it was that made them feel okay, we can fill that if we get them help and we treat them. And there's no such thing as zero tolerance, because that would mean that we have no tolerance, right? Like, what does that mean? We treat them with kindness and respect and compassion, and we fill that hole with every positive thing we have. 365 days a year, they get a fresh start. And you know what? Here's something I didn't know was going to happen. That turns into that, and guess what? I have an army of young people, sober young people, whose only mission in life is to help other young people get better. Go figure. There's an unintended consequence, right? That's all they live for. Obviously to keep themselves okay, but now I've got hundreds of kids who are willing to go to the mat for other people who are struggling. And now when I get a phone call, so-and-so needs a detox, I can call one of them, and they meet them at the emergency room. I never knew that was I didn't know. There's this little symbol here. Y'all might have seen it, right? Stigma, much? Remember that? This back in the 80s, it's for gay, lesbian, transsexual, transgender, LGBTQ, all of those. I was one of these, I had one of those on my door when I was a teacher, and it meant that people who are struggling with sexuality issues can come and talk to us, and we're going to treat them with kindness and dignity. And we're going to listen to them, and we're going to say, what else? What else can I do? I think I actually got a stipend for being an advisor for the GLBTQ club, and which was sweet. I don't know if that's available, and if it is, you should all do it. Kevin Jennings, who used to be the former head of safe and drug-free schools for the United States Department of Education, came up with this. And he didn't get it evidence-based. He didn't put it through any vetting process. He just made triangles. And he put them everywhere, right? And then you see, like, this is international symbol for take it or leave it. Mm-hmm. And now there's like this awesome It Gets Better project. It doesn't even feel like uncomfortable to say gay anymore. It's like, you're gay, cool. Me too. Yeah, I did that. Like, it's not even a stigma. You know, and people keep talking about how cancer was a stigma, and these illnesses are a stigma, and being gay is a stigma. It's not a stigma. It's actually kind of cool. Well, you know what? Why can't we find a way to reduce the stigma from mental health and substance use? My good friend, Dr. Barbara Frey, she's a research psychologist. She's super duper smart. And I have really good ideas, but she actually develops them into programs. And so I was sitting with Kevin Jennings, the triangle guy. Oh, God, I'm sorry, Kevin. And he's a lot more than that. And he said, it doesn't have to be perfect, Michelle. Just do something. And this is all I can come up with. We have posters that we put up all over the community. And we have clergy that have been trained. And we have law enforcement. And we have pediatricians. And we go and we train people with motivational interviewing and strength-based practices. And we try to find ways to engage these children and let them come to us and say, I feel really uncomfortable. I can't really, something's going on at home. Let us be ambassadors to help these children. Let them find us and know that it's okay to discuss stuff with. Everyone here is approachable by a young person who might have mental health and substance. I know that for a fact because I met you all. Okay, maybe not all of you, but most of you. And I can tell you, kids will come and talk to you because they don't want to stay sick. They know. Maybe it's not going to be the first 20 times that they feel like, oh, I should probably, oh, maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't. But I can tell you, you keep coming back. So the little girl I mentioned, she got her pillow and her blanket, and I'd love to say she is on that recovery rainbow, but she's not. Because addiction it's chronic and it's relapsing. But she knows I'll be there. And she knows everyone else in my school will be there because we don't give up on children and we don't shoot our wounded. And I'm telling you right now, until we all understand what this is, we'll never, ever get to this. Thank you.